Justice Thursdays, our conversation is what we want to have today, and the head of Tribunal Secretariat and Registrar of the Tribunals as well is with us in the studio, Anne Asugah. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Welcome. This is called Kenya's biggest conversation. What you're sitting on is the hot seat. We warm it so that, everybody who comes here, it's early morning. Sometimes, it's been raining at night in some parts of Nairobi. It could have been cold. So we warm it so that you just feel comfortable. When the bee comes to your home,
welcome the bee.
And give it
tea.
Yes.
Tea. A little bit early to talk about Maratina, but that's fine.
Yeah. Yes. Have some tea so that when we come to your court or your tribunal, you know what we'll expect.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Honey.
Some honey. Sindio?
Yes.
We're talking about tribunals and the importance then of tribunals in the country. First, I think we may need to have just a basic Mwananchi definition of what is a tribunal.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me today to speak about tribunals in the judiciary. And the basic definition of tribunals is that they are specialized bodies that have judicial character.
Mm-hmm.
They are clothed with judicial powers in the sense that they are determining disputes between two people. There are two disputants. One is claiming this, the other one is claiming this, and there is an arbiter to listen to that, or a panel of arbiters. So tribunals are distinct, specialized bodies that deal with sectoral specific issues that are not general. And they hear disputes between government and civilians, or civilians and civilians. And they don't have any criminal jurisdiction. They don't do penal matters. So you don't have a murder tribunal, for instance, because that's a criminal offense. They only deal with civil disputes, yes.
So it's some form of arbitration, or is that different?
It is not a form of arbitration. It's a form of dispute resolution that is not necessarily court-like.
Okay.
It is court-like, but not strictly court in the sense of rules of procedure and technicalities and the way that the matters are conducted. If you go to court, you will find in court there are very, very many rules and procedures that you need to follow. You file a whole lot of documentation. Normally in courts you have a judicial officer, that's a magistrate, a judge, singularly sitting to hear matters.
Yes.
In tribunals you'll find that's different. Most of the tribunals are run by a bench of 3 minimum, and usually 5 sometimes. So an act of parliament will stipulate how many people sit in a panel. And the people sitting in those panels are specialists in the area of expertise. So you will not have all of them as lawyers. To be a judge in this country, you have to be a lawyer. To be in a tribunal, you don't need to be a legal person. You just need to be a specialist in the field that the tribunal is dealing in.
A couple of weeks back, we hosted the Honorable Caroline Kendago, who is the Deputy Registrar for Mediation.
Yes.
So how do you distinguish mediation into this? Is it part of what you do?
You see, Eric, Article 159 of the Constitution is very clear that judiciary and tribunals shall promote alternative sources of dispute resolution. And the Chief Justice's vision of STARJ, the social transformation through access to justice, has what we call the multi-door approach to justice. So there are many doorways of getting justice. One of them is mediation. One of them is through tribunals. One of them is through small claims courts. One of them is AJES, which is alternative justice systems. And of course, the other one is through the courts. Yeah. So mediation is strictly different because tribunals are part of the users of the mediation as part of justice administration. The thing with tribunals is that they're established by acts of parliament. So you'll find in Kenya, we have about 38 tribunals as currently constituted, established by 38 acts of parliament. And each act of parliament stipulates how the tribunal will be run, the jurisdiction, the quorum, the remuneration, the number of members, and so forth and so forth. Yeah. So tribunals is one of the doorways that exist to access justice in this country.
Okay.
Yes.
Some examples of tribunals.
Oh, there are quite a number. There is, for your sector, for instance, you have Communication and Multimedia Appeals Tribunal. There's the Aviation Tribunal that deals with skyways and airline issues and, all those things to do with aviation. You have the Energy and Petroleum Tribunal, the crisis you have for fuel shortage. Any decision made by EPRA is supposed to go to the Energy and Petroleum Tribunal. And I know they are sitting today to listen to some of those things that are happening in the country. You have the Business Premises and Rent Tribunal. If you're a member of a SACCO and you have a dispute with your SACCO, you go to the Cooperative Tribunal because that's the one that deals with issues of members of SACCOs. Have your deposits been taken away? Are you not getting your deposits? If you're a pensioner and the Retirement Benefits Authority is not giving you your pension, you go to the Retirement Benefits Tribunal and complain there about a decision on the retirement benefits or that you haven't gotten. So there are quite a number. There are quite a number of tribunals. Yes.
Yes, go ahead, Siti.
What I wanted to ask is, if you look at a tribunal that, say, would cover matters that pertain to the media, just give me an example of the sort of dispute that would come, that would be brought, or something that you've heard of that comes before a tribunal that deals with this particular sector.
For instance, let's talk about the Communication and Multimedia Appeals Tribunal. If you look at Safaricom and Airtel and issues of SIM card registration, issues of termination rates, those are issues that actually come to the Communication and Multimedia Appeals Tribunal. If you look at Media Complaints Commission, and journalists and people in the media space, they normally complain to that space, and if that they're not satisfied, they can do appeals to the it's called CAMAT in short, Communication and Multimedia Appeals Tribunal. So every sector has sort of a specialized, the most key issue is the specialization of the members that sit in those tribunals from their own field, but are also led by a legal person to do the judicial part of it, because you have to consider access to justice. You hear one side and you must hear the other side, and that's why it has the judicial character that we were talking about, but strictly speaking, not in the court sense of it in terms of the rules of procedure.
Do you get a sense sometimes, looking at the tribunals that have been created by the various acts of parliament, that some of them are duplicating roles of others? So, for example, Business Premises Rent Tribunal and Rent Restriction Tribunal. What's the difference?
Yes, absolutely. There are some overlaps, and there is a plan or a policy underway that is to rationalize and sort of consolidate some of them. Business Premises Rent Tribunal deals with rent from business premises. If you are sitting in these premises that we are sitting in and it is rented and you don't pay rent, then that, based on whether you're a controlled tenant or a leased tenant, which is a technical issue now, you would go to the business premises. The rent restriction, on the other hand, deals with the house you live in, your dwelling place. So if you don't pay rent at your dwelling place, then you go to the rent restriction tribunal. But Parliament, having realized that there are duplication and there is overlap, has come up with the Landlord and Tenant Bill, which has advanced considerably. It's in the Senate now. It's almost, I think, in the third reading or second reading. So they have consolidated those two to make it just the Landlord and Tenant Tribunal to stop the overlaps between the two. But yes, there are overlaps and there is need for rationalization so that you don't have all of them scattered.
Okay. And then at what point does someone need to go, for example, to a rent dispute tribunal? If you have the small claims court and you have the AJS, where do you determine? So this one, you need to go to the alternative justice system. This one goes to mediation. This one goes to small claims court. And this one goes to specific tribunal.
Okay. So thank you for that question. We have what is called concurrent jurisdiction. The High Court has original jurisdiction in civil and criminal matters across the country. The Rent Restriction Tribunal deals with rent issues. If I owe you rent and it is below 1 million shillings,
yes,
it is a similar claim to what would a small claims court would actually listen to.
Yeah.
So there's a question of concurrent jurisdiction there. But the courts have settled it in several decisions, including the Court of Appeal, that the forum that is given as your first instance to come is where you go. And you will find that judges and even magistrates will refer those claims to the rent restriction tribunal, because that's the first forum required by law for you to appear. So you will find very good. Would you say clever litigants? We are Kenyans.
Yeah.
I can file at the rent restriction based on how fast I want it done, or I can go to the small claims and mark my time. And the adjudicator at the small claims might not know that I have a case in the rent restriction tribunal. And I can file even in the business, the three of them, whichever gives me, it's at the very tail end is when somebody will realize, no, you are not supposed to be here. So there's that concurrent jurisdiction, but ideally it ought to be stemmed at the filing level. So it's for us to sensitize the people who receive matters that this is a rent claim, you go to the rent restriction. This is a claim for small claims, yes.
There's a headline today in, today is Thursday, so Standard has the real estate section. What to do when your landlord eats deposit money? Is that where they go to this rent tribunal?
It depends on the landlord. Is it a landlord for business premises? Is it a landlord for rent? But that's where they end. That's where they go to. That's where their dispute is articulated and determined.
Where the issues of landlord having eaten deposit.
Absolutely.
Eric,
the advantages with tribunals is that they decongest the courts. Those matters don't go to the mainstream courts.
Yeah.
The timelines in tribunals are very short. They are shorter than even the small claims. There are tribunals that have to make decisions within 30 days. So your matters are heard very, very quickly. But also they are very specialized. The people who sit in the panels are specialists in their own area. So you will find if it's energy, there are engineers from the petroleum sector, from the energy sector. So the specialization bit gives a decision that, actually reflects what is on the ground in terms of specifics, in terms of technical advice. So that's one of the reasons why tribunals exist, because of the specialization.
And if you have an issue with the tribunal, where then do you go?
So if you are aggrieved by a tribunal in terms of an appeal?
Yes, in terms of the outcomes of whatever took you there.
Yes. Every statute prescribes where you go to appeal in case you're dissatisfied with an outcome of a tribunal. For instance, for rent restriction and business premises, you go straight to Environment and Land Court. That's very, very specific. For the other tribunals, you appeal to the High Court. So there's an appellate mechanism that you're dissatisfied, you appeal to the High Court. A while ago, before the Constitution of Kenya 2010, there were statutes that would not allow tribunals' decisions to be appealed in terms of the tribunal decision was final. Yes, but that has changed, and the Constitution has expanded a lot of space in terms of justice administration.
Okay, now a tribunal makes a decision. How do they enforce it?
Most tribunals do not have powers to enforce their decisions. You have to go to the magistrate courts or the High Court to enforce their decisions. A few tribunals do. And I'm so glad you've asked that question, because one of the things I mentioned earlier is that we are working on a policy framework to regulate or the governance framework of tribunals. You see, if you have 38 statutes regulating 38 tribunals in terms of governance framework, in terms of how do you file, how do you appoint, how do you pay, what are the qualifications, and they're all different. So every statute gives the tribunal its own powers. So some statutes give tribunals power to enforce their own decisions. For instance, cooperative tribunal enforces its own decisions. Business premises the same. There are others that you actually have to take the order to the magistrate's court or to the High Court to enforce that decision, yes.
You see, if you then have to go to yet another jurisdiction to have this matter enforced, the time-saving aspect that the tribunal was supposed to afford you,
yes,
is it then not nullified? Because, or is there a fast-track process where if you've gone to the tribunal and it's known, he may talk a tribunal,
you go to us. There's a lane for you.
There's a lane for you with a red marking.
Yes.
Not really. There's not like a lane, but nature of tribunals is the specialized nature of a tribunal is when an order is given. Most of the times the parties comply. So you don't really have to, you go to and enforce an order when the other party actually declines to comply. So you need to use some form of judicial action to make them comply. And I agree with you, the timeline could be expanded, and of course it would be the purpose of having shorter timelines at tribunals, which is why we need to work on the framework. But we've not had very, very serious instances where tribunal matters are lined up because of lack of enforcement. That hasn't been very, very, it's not a matter of notoriety, so to speak. But it could be, especially for rent issues and business premises and rent issues. But for the other tribunals, it's hardly a matter of notoriety. But it's a policy framework in the making.
The reason why I asked the question is
Yes.
because one hears of even court orders.
Yes.
And the order is issued, and thereafter, the enforcement becomes a point of discussion.
Yes.
Not actually enforcement.
Yes.
We've even heard bodies that deal with such matters like the ethics and anti-corruption. Again, comes to enforcement, another story arises. So, we were told that because of these problems, all these agencies that deal with more or less the same thing have a committee where they meet and discuss and they move forward. Mm-hmm. Are the tribunals part and parcel of this body of judicial officers, security officers, mm-hmm. and all these officers that deal with these same matters? Are they part of it?
Okay. Tribunals are within judiciary.
Yes.
They are part of NCAJ.
Yes.
So all issues relating to tribunal governance are under the Office of the Chief Justice.
Yes.
And the Chief Registrar
Yes.
of the judiciary. So issues relating to administration of justice in the tribunal sector is also discussed at that level of NCAJ. So issues of policy, governance framework, how we do enforcement, because most of the issues we deal with affect large sectors of the economy. So if you are in the public-private partnership space and an order has been given that this public-private partnership should move on, as the person who is enforcing it, as either as the contracting authority or as the bidder, you really cannot not obey that order and wait for enforcement. So, as I've said, the tribunal space is more specialized and very sectoral. It's not the chances or the opportunities for not enforcing those orders are usually very slim, unless it's matters of notoriety like rent and cooperative and business premises. We have issues where orders are not enforced. But in the other sector, which is the bigger sector, we haven't had that. But yes, tribunals are part of the NCAJ body that the CJ leads, and that's where those issues are discussed, yes.
And you head the Tribunal Secretariat.
Yes.
What is that?
The Tribunal Secretariat is a secretariat that coordinates the affairs of tribunals. Prior to the Constitution of Kenya 2010, tribunals were managed as part of departments in the executive. So they were part of the ministry, so to speak, and some still are. So the Constitution of Kenya 2010 placed tribunals in the judiciary, and the transition of tribunals from the executive began. Mm-hmm. And so to coordinate the affairs of that transition, coordinate the affairs of tribunals in terms of how do they budget? How do they run? When do members expire, and who lets know the authorities that members have expired? How do you, who is a liaison person between tribunals and the judiciary in terms of making sure they are run efficiently, members are facilitated? That's the work of the Tribunal Secretariat that I heard. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as a registrar, then you are in charge of the administration
Absolutely.
of all the tribunals.
I am overall in charge of the people who run tribunals. Every tribunal has an administrator who is a AIE holder, meaning they are authorized to incur expenditure. So every tribunal has its own budget. That budget is appropriated by the judiciary. So the judiciary funds the tribunals, and we oversee how that budget is run to ensure that it gives value for money as required by the Constitution. Yeah.
And how about now coordination of the work of the tribunal itself in terms of looking at the caseloads, looking at the pace at which they are working?
Yes.
Is that still under you?
So every tribunal, let's take for instance the Energy and Petroleum Tribunal. Every tribunal has a minimum of 5 members. Some have 6 members, with 18 being ad hoc. The chair in a tribunal is the overall manager of the tribunal in terms of case administration. That's the judicial function. So in terms of whether cases are moving, the case management, that's the responsibility of the chair and the responsibility of the administrator and the court administrator. Because every tribunal has an administrator who is managing staff, managing finances, but they also have a court administrator who is managing the registry.
Okay.
So I come in if Eric went to a tribunal and couldn't be heard, and there was a problem. The chairpersons have not been paid, and there's a problem. So that is my office is to make sure the welfare of the members and the staff who work there is being looked at the judiciary level.
And the customers.
And the customers.
Okay.
Yes.
Time for us to take a break. It's 7:30, Kenya's biggest conversation. Anne Asugah is a registrar and head of tribunals at Secretariat. We are talking about tribunals today and trying to understand, so what are tribunals? What's their role? What's their mandate? How many tribunals do we have? In what sectors do they cover? And how then do you go to a tribunal? That's the part that we'll be talking about after we take this quick break.
This is the Situation Room.
Someone is asking on Twitter, so they had paid for a goat in Shags. Plan goat to be slaughtered over Easter. Now, not many people are going home for Easter because fuel. So they're asking, Sasa, iyo mbuzi, what happens? Big issues. You see, there's a spillover of issues. And you're saying that we have a tribunal that deals with fuel prices and fuel issues, rather, petroleum sector. So what kind of people lodge their disputes there? Is it industry players or do consumers also go to the tribunal?
Okay, thank you, Eric. For instance, the Energy and Petroleum Tribunal deals with decisions of EPRA.
Okay.
So the first port of call for a consumer is EPRA. Kenya power prices, fuel prices. The person must first lodge a complaint to EPRA, and then EPRA makes a decision, and you can appeal the decision of EPRA now to the Energy and Petroleum Tribunal. So there must be an interaction with EPRA first for you to actually go to the Energy and Petroleum Tribunal.
So do ordinary consumers go to the tribunal?
Yes.
Say just somebody who feels, no, power costs are too high.
Yes.
So they go to the tribunal.
Yes, they do.
Are there such ongoing, or you may not have the details at present?
For coming to the tribunal? All tribunals are on e-filing. You remember in 2020 when COVID came, the judiciary went digital, and we started using technology to dispense justice.
Yes.
All the tribunals conduct virtual sittings mostly, except for those that the clients may not access the digital space, like red restriction. So every other tribunal is on e-filing. So you must sign up first as an individual or as an organization to file your matters, and that is e-filing at court.to.ke. That is on our website. Once you sign up and the steps are there, you can follow the steps on e-filing, and you're able to receive. But if you're really, really stuck, you can come to where the Energy Tribunal is. It's at Forodha House, where our offices are, at 4th floor in Forodha House, which is at Community. The former income tax house.
I see.
Yeah.
So you have to go and create an account on the e-filing portal
Yes.
for you to then start accessing the services.
Absolutely.
It doesn't recognize the e-citizen information. If I have an e-citizen account, do I have to go and open another one here for court?
I think the integration is still ongoing. I think that discussion between the judiciary and other players in the sector is still ongoing. But currently we are doing it through the e-filing. You have to file a matter through the e-filing portal in the judiciary.
Okay. You're saying, so this is meant to simplify and also expedite matters that don't need to go to the High Court.
Yes.
So if I go to the e-filing portal, do I need to file like the way, you go to court and I don't know, there's a whole... This is a matter, so-and-so as a plaintiff versus so-and-so as defendant, whereas where 2, where 4, it has been determined therein, therefore.
Not really. There are two ways to do it. First, you can actually write a letter, and you do it on e-file. You can even send it on email, and when it becomes a dispute, when you say Kenya Power has overbilled me to the tune of so much, I wish to lodge a complaint, that letter will be converted into an e-file, even by the staff at the registry. So even if you send an email or you send it as a letter on e-file without having the where to wherefore, the staff at the registry, that's their job to convert that dispute into an e-file that can actually now be heard by a panel of members. So the rules of procedure of tribunals are fairly relaxed.
Okay.
In very, very specialized cases where you have big players, for instance, if you have competition tribunal where you're merging, if for instance, Standard Group is merging with Nation, for instance, those are mergers and acquisitions. Those are very big players. They are required to articulate their issues in a more concise, and they have lawyers and they're represented. If you're represented, we expect that the matter will be, framed in a manner that actually discloses the cause of action. If I'm unrepresented, I could come with a letter and say, this is what the dispute is. This is what I want to tell the tribunal. And you'll not be turned away because the format is wrong, or you have not written, I am a male defendant of 20 years of wherever. We are going to ask you just the normal details. What's your contact? Where do you live? What is the dispute? And we have developed standard forms. You can fill in those and they become part of what the dispute it is that you want determined.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's got to be simplified. We see in court, you go to court and you're told, first of all, jurisdiction. Second, the case is knocked out on technicalities. You did not file, I don't know what. There was no affidavit. There was no witness statement. So this one, you don't require any of that.
If you're going to claim something against somebody, definitely you require to produce evidence. If I come and say Kenya Power overbilled me, how do you as an adjudicator, or how do I as a member of a tribunal know that you are overbilled? You have to produce the receipt. You have to show the billing. So those things are not dispensed with. It's just the manner in which that it's done. It is, you sometimes in court you have to make a written application, you file it, you serve to produce that evidence. In tribunals it could be different because the party is across the aisle and they're like, no, we have the receipts here. Then you produce them. So there is not that mode of keeping on making applications, the other party to respond with preliminary objections and things like that. So the production of evidence is faster, because if I'm a member of a cooperative, if I'm a member of a SACCO, and I say, you took my deposits, and the SACCO chair or whoever runs the SACCO is across the aisle, they're asked immediately, is this person a member? Do you have the register? And they are told, come with the register. And that's dispensed with at that hearing. So those issues of application and then, no, we oppose production, that doesn't happen.
Seeking adjournments, left, right, and center.
No, that doesn't happen. In a span of 3 months, usually tribunals have dispensed with their matters.
What exactly does the Secretariat do to ensure that the citizens of this country know about all these services that are offered by this large diversification?
Okay. Yes. That's a very, very good question. One of the biggest challenges, apart from funding, which is a challenge to judiciary generally, is public awareness of the existence of tribunals. Majority of the tribunals that I have mentioned, as I've said, were run as departments of the ministry. Tribunals are there to enforce department policy, of government policy. And then when a dispute arises between the makers of the policy and the people who are actually implementing that policy, then tribunals come in. The new constitution then came in with issues of access to justice, impartiality, and you've heard of an act of parliament called the Fair Administration Act, where you actually have to be very, very particular about how procedural fairness, before you make an administrative decision that affects the rights of people, you must have procedural fairness, meaning you have to give people a chance to explain themselves, be heard, before you make an adverse decision against them. So in terms of public awareness, we are really haven't had that much public awareness on tribunals. Most people are not aware that they exist, because the transitioning has just started happening as recently as 2015. This is the time we are putting in structures. That's why I'm here to, let Kenyans know that there are tribunals in Kenya that can hear their matters, and they are specialized, and they are working, and they are ready to hear Kenyans' disputes.
From the perspective of the tribunals, what do you look at and then determine and say to yourself, we have succeeded, we have done a good job?
I don't think it would be really us. It would be the customers to tell us whether we are doing a good job, and they're normally customer satisfaction surveys. But one of the internal ways to do that as a tribunal, if I was sitting in a tribunal, or even when administering tribunals, is the appeal success rate. How many times are your decisions appealed against, and how many times do those succeed? So you're looking at, if your customers are, after you make a decision, if your customers are always on appeal and the court is always allowing that appeal, then that would speak to questions of, are you doing very well in terms of administering justice or grasp of the issues? That would be one of the identifiers. The other identifiers is the number of complaints that you receive from customers in terms of service delivery. Are you receiving the service that you wanted or you requested? Then if the number of complaints keeps spiking, then there's a problem in terms of the way the tribunals are run. And that would actually come to us for us to make sure that those gaps are filled.
You know, I ask this question because when you talk about dispute resolution,
Yes.
and the levels at which disputes arise and the levels at which they need to be resolved, and what in my mind appears to be a certain very litigious position that Kenyans seem to have taken, where everything needs to go to court, even those that don't need to. If people do not understand what is, or don't, let's start with don't know what is available to address the issue that they have, funding notwithstanding, are there other arms of government that you could latch onto who would do a better job? I'll give an example of what I mean. Something goes to the police, they enter it on the OB. Is it possible for that arm of government to direct people, because they get very many cases firsthand? Is it possible for them to direct people and say, you know, folks, this particular matter that you brought here,
Go to tribunal.
go to tribunal, and the tribunal is found here, or go to this and go to the other?
That's true. The Rent Restriction Tribunal and Business Premises Tribunal, one of the biggest partners they have are the police stations. That's the first port of call. Where if you're being evicted by your landlord, or your tenant is not paying rent, sometimes the landlord starts at the police station, telling the OCS or the police, this is a tenant, they have refused to pay rent, and the police is, because usually eviction notices are issued the police are usually involved in the eviction. Or not evicting, so they know those things. The other tribunals, for instance, let's talk about industrial property tribunal. They are so technical in terms of the matters they deal with that the awareness is only limited to that sector only. So if you're patent holders, if you're utility designers, if you're manufacturers, you're the only stakeholders within that space. So the stakeholders are so identifiable, and those are the people you actually go to. If you look at aviation, the sector that you're dealing with is a sectoral specific, very, very specific people, so that the transport sector will not benefit from the aviation tribunal awareness, because their matters are not necessarily handled there. The transport sector will be going to the Transport Licensing Appeals Board. So the sectoral awareness is there. And I can tell you within the last maybe 3 years that the Secretariat has been in existence, we've seen a huge spike of cases being filed. As we speak right now, the tribunals that we run in judiciary, because there are about 20, we have a caseload of over 25,000 cases across all the tribunals, which was like they were less than 10,000 when we took over. So the spike is really going on and on. So people are becoming more aware based on what the outcomes are, the speed, and the fact that now there's semblance of order. There used to be a lot of people didn't know, where do I go? Do I go here? Do I go here? With the development of systems in the judiciary, something has happened, and there's a huge spike. So you will find Communication and Multimedia Appeals Tribunal was just operationalized in 2017 when judiciary started. There was a previous tribunal that was not necessarily so all-encompassing, and they have now a spike of cases, and they are sitting every week. Every week they sit to hear matters. So the awareness there, but needs to be increased.
I have to ask, of all these 38 tribunals, how widespread are they within our 47 counties?
Oh, they are not widespread. They are localized in Nairobi. The decentralization process is yet to take place. The only tribunals that have regional presence are the big three. We call them the big three. Like there you have the big five elephants, and
Okay.
we have the business
Who are
premises
the,
rent.
the judicial elephants?
Yes.
Okay.
Cooperative Tribunal has the regional offices. So the 8 regions, you remember the provinces? They are in those provinces. Kisumu, Kakamega, Nyeri, Mombasa, Meru. Those are regional offices. So you can actually go and file matters there. Business premises the same, and rent restriction the same. The rest of the tribunals actually do circuits. If you need to file matters across board, they do circuits. There's one tribunal that has had a very serious impact in the education sector. It's called the Education Appeals Tribunal. They hear decisions from they hear appeals from the decisions of county boards of education across the 47 counties. And that's one of the tribunals we are looking to see how do we spread the wings to make sure their presence is also at the counties. But that is going to have to happen for all the tribunals at the county level. But we first need a framework that governs all the tribunals to make sure that happens, because the transition happened in the absence of a governance framework on appointments, qualifications, and just mainstreaming tribunal operations.
And once again, the usual suspect is to blame: funding.
It's a number of factors, but I wouldn't want to jeopardize the work that has been done. There's a bill in place. It's being discussed. It's multi-sectoral because tribunals are in all sectors, so it can't be one sector over the other. It is a whole coterie of people involved, government agencies, so it's work in progress, and it's going on very well.
Would I be right to say, Anne, that it's your mandate as head of the Tribunal Secretariat to ensure that these tribunals have presence across the country, that everybody can then easily access the services of these tribunals?
Absolutely, it is.
How long till you get this job done?
I would love to do the job tomorrow, Eric, if Parliament would give us the money to do the job tomorrow. We would be in the counties tomorrow. Let's take
How much do you need? I know a guy.
You know a guy.
Who knows a guy?
Introduce me to your guy. Tribunals funding comes with judiciary funding. So if judiciary funding is not to the extent that was requested, then the funding comes, it keeps being slashed across board.
That's okay, Anne.
Yeah.
What is your budget? What is your budget to actually get the tribunals working as optimally as they should?
Give me about 5 billion.
Per year.
Yes.
And
We'll work something out.
And you'll be good.
I'll be good.
5 billion every year.
Yes.
Initially to set up
Just the setup
offices
infrastructure.
And so this will run for 3 years, and then you'll be good. And then after that, you reduce the budget.
We'll reduce the budget to recurrent.
Okay.
And we can do 1.2.
How much of that have you requested for in the judiciary budget this year?
This year we did about 800 million.
Why?
In terms of infrastructure.
Why did you request for 800 million when you know that your need is 5 billion?
Because budgets are incremental. You have to also look at your absorption levels. You may not absorb that kind of money in 1 year.
Okay.
So you have to be realistic on the requests that you make.
Okay.
So if you get 800 million, with the optimal utilization, with membership, you are able to absorb so much.
So what are you going to do with 800 million if you receive the full 800 million in the next budget?
The first thing is to identify space for tribunals, because right now tribunals are scattered all over Nairobi. Eric, if you have a NEMA issue, National Environment and Management Authority issue, you'll be going to South Sea. That's where the tribunal sits, the National Environment Tribunal. But then your landlord wants to evict you. So you have to run to Crescent House in town, which is very far next to Nairobi University. Then you remember, no, I'm a member of FKF or something, and I need to be at sports disputes. It's at an SSF house. So you start running around town in a circle and you don't know where to, So you start looking for, could you hold my brief here, then hold my brief here? So the first thing we have to do, and the budgets we are looking for first, is a tribunals plaza to house tribunals where, when you enter the High Court in Milimani,
It's a one-stop shop.
one-stop shop. It has everything.
Okay.
When you enter Milimani High Court, you're able to access all the courts at once.
Okay.
So you don't have to, run
Keep
around.
hopping up and
yes.
down. So that is what you've requested for in this year's,
In the
next year's budget.
financial year.
And the next financial year has a judiciary fund now, which is money going to be controlled by the judiciary.
Yes.
So if you get this, you're saying that within 12 months from June 2022, by June 2023, all tribunals should ideally be housed in one place.
That is if you get it. And I know we haven't. So you've seen the supplementary.
Eric,
You've
should
seen
we
the
go
budget.
and see those guys who take 2 billion every day from
Yeah, we'll talk to them.
Yeah.
Perhaps. So funding is a real issue, and it's something that we really should take seriously. It is our greatest impediment to access to justice. The greatest impediment.
I'm stuck at a point where, look, you are asking for 800 million shillings from the judiciary. The judiciary has a budget. If they give you, say, 60% of that,
Yes.
what would you do with it? And how can we say that the Tribunal Secretariat absorption rate is so good that we can actually move them to the next stage?
The next level. You have to look at very many factors. So there's what 800 million would be development budget, then there's recurrent budget. But that's a combined budget for 800 million. Normally, you will not get perhaps 60% because the kitty that is shareable is so small. You'll probably get maybe 40% of that. And so you only deal with the recurrent costs of actually moving, making sure people are sitting and hearing Kenyans.
Day-to-day activities.
Yes. Actually, until you get the actual money that you request for, you're not able to move forward. It's a real issue.
Hiyo tutaongea.
Perhaps tufanye kamchango.
Tuite kaharambe ya kusaidia.
Impromptu.
We cannot do that when we have 3.3 trillion shilling budget. These are the jokes that we talk about. And we thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here, and thank you for listening to me.
Asante
It's a
sana.
pleasure.
Anne Asugah is the Registrar and Head of Tribunal Secretariat. We've been talking about tribunals and what tribunals do to ease access to justice and their role in that. Again, what's the Chief Justice's plan on justice, on social justice?
Social transformation through access to justice.
There you go.
STUDGE.
STUDGE.
Yes.
Social transformation through access to justice.
Yes.